Good afternoon and welcome back to the Landmarks Preservation Commission's public hearing and public meeting of June 27th, 2023. We are going to resume this afternoon session with public hearing item number 2. And we have some remote capability available for members of the public who wish to testify remotely, and that information can be found on our website.
You're locked. All right, so you're live on YouTube, but
Okay, that's fine. So again, it's we're resuming the afternoon session of June 27th, 2023 public hearing, public meeting this afternoon with item number 2. And we do, this meeting is also being held via Zoom. So if any members of the public wish to testify remotely, they may do so by logging into the meeting, and the information on how to do that can be found on our website. And if anyone just wants to watch the proceedings, they can do so at our YouTube channel. And with that, I'll turn it over to Corey Harala, our Director of Preservation, to take us through the afternoon agenda items.
Thank you, Sarah. We'll begin Preservation Department's afternoon agenda with a public hearing item number 2, LPC 23-05495. This is an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 611, Lot 13, 52 Charles Street in the Greenwich Village Historic District. A Greek Revival style row house built in 1839 to 40. The application is to construct rear yard and rooftop additions.
the arrows on the start and the aqua comes direction.
Oh, very good.
Aaron.
Thank you. Good to see you all. Hi, Cass Stack with Higgins Quays Brothman Partners. It's nice to be here with you again. I'll just introduce the project team. My colleague Jesse Kling, our project architect Mike Schmidt, and his colleague Camilla, and our client Jacob Frumpkin. We're excited to present this project to you all for the rehabilitation of 52 Charles Street in the Greenwich Village Historic District. 52 Charles Street, which you can see on the right in the photograph in the center with a black painted cornice, is one of a row of 5 houses that was constructed in 1840. The facade is largely intact with some alterations on the street facade. You can see its location in the district map on the upper left, and then its position in this block that was bisected by the cutting of 7th Avenue, highlighted in magenta on the Sandor map. It's a 20-foot wide row house, as are the other 4 buildings that flank it. So it is 42. It is it's 52. It is in the middle of this group of 5 houses. So an aerial view, just to orient you to the block context, you can see 52 is called out in plan, and the overall scope of work which is involved in this project includes the restoration of the street facade, which we're working with the staff on, but what's before you today are modifications on the roof and in the rear yard. You can see from the block context that the block itself is filled with buildings from the 19th century, the early 20th century, and even some more recent buildings from the 21st century. And I want to acknowledge at the outset that this application includes components that you have seen before, particularly on perhaps recent projects in the West Village or the Upper East or Upper West Side with rooftop additions, and what we're proposing is a rear yard extension that's full height in this instance. And I do want to acknowledge that you've seen those elements in other applications, but I think there's something particular about this block, and in particular as well about this group of 5 houses that we think lends itself to the change that we're proposing as being appropriate. You can tell from the area that this block is very densely filled with rear yard extensions and new construction. There's a density, there's a history of full height extensions, which I'll describe in just a moment. And there's also a history of commission approved rooftop construction, which we also think is relevant to the overall discussion. An existing view of the row with the 5 houses in the row called out. This is a current view, and our proposed work really, as I said, is restorative in nature along the front facade. It's taking the aluminum windows out, putting 6/6 multi-light windows back, knitting the building back into the row, and sort of bringing back that continuity, and not doing it in a way that scrubs the distinctions that exist at present, but really sort of the key repetitive features like the cornice, the windows, the ironwork, restoring those elements. And the changes really that are visible for this project are at the rear of the building. And we think, given the context, they could be found to be appropriate. This is coming around the corner off of Charles now on 7th Avenue and looking south. So the building on the right side of the photograph was constructed on this sort of piecemeal triangular lot following the construction of the subway. And then the building, the red brick building on the far left margin of the slide was approved by the commission and completed about say 6 or 7 years ago. What's in between are the rear yard extensions of the buildings that front onto Charles Street. You'll see this in plan in just a moment, but this is an irregular block for sure, with great density and quite exposed from the side. So this is a sort of a tighter shot looking over that extension off of one of the buildings in the row. And I'm going to go up and just point out the back of 52 and the adjacent buildings that already have full height extensions. So this is the eastern end of the road, and this is the western end of the road. So 56, 54, and 48 all have full height rear yard extensions. One is actually original to the row. One was built 10 years after the road was constructed in about 20 years in about 1859. And then one was approved under a commission review. So I think there's a context here for full height extensions that is different, perhaps than in other block contexts. So the proposal involves bringing the full height of the back to a coplanar position to the other buildings, the other 3 out of the 5, and building a small addition on the roof that is similar in scale, perhaps a bit smaller than an addition that was approved in 2016 on the building just next door, not yet constructed, as well as other rooftop features. So the 2 components are the extension and this small addition, which you'll see has been pushed back from the sidewall parapet to allow for fire department access directly on the main roof. It eliminates the need for railing, so it's been minimized in scale, but still serves the applicant to gain a bit of additional area up on the roof. Some historical photographs of the block. 1914 on the left and 1940 on the right. Soon after the demolition was carried out on the left for the subway, and then the modifications, including the introduction of skylight windows and the facades at 48 and 50. There are visible skylights, or the back sides of visible skylights on those roofs, which you only see from 7th Avenue. So because of the cut, there are features in the back of this block that you see because of the cut, and you can see the rest of the row in the tax photo. And the changes that sort of occurred historically over time. We're very familiar with this story and the impact of the cutting of 7th Avenue and what it did to this portion of the historic district. On the left, obviously, is an overall map of the area of the work from 1911 and then 1916 following the cut. And I think the key point that I'd like to make is that on the left, where you can see the outline of 52 Charles in the block, in 1911, there was a fairly defined donut to this block. But by 1916 and then subsequently, the edges have been sort of filled in. So there's an increasing density that one sees both on the eastern portion as well as the remaining western portion of the block where our project site is. So we think that's a relevant piece to the story. And looking at more closely at the history and the way these buildings were constructed, we have 2 maps, 1854 on the top and 1859 on the bottom. Overviews of the block, top and bottom, and then details of the row on the right. And on the top image, what you can see, and I think I'll focus your attention to the details because I think it's a little bit easier to see. You can see that the original row, again, of 5 houses, 42, which is the houses where we numbered, that's 48 today, but that house was built with a full height extension. So one of the 5 houses actually had an extension originally. The other 4 houses had very tall wood extensions off the back of the houses. So there were already features on the back of these houses. By 1859, 54 Charles Street had also had a full height extension constructed. That's this element. So within this row of 5 houses, one was built with a full height extension, and by 1859, another had already gained a full height extension. So we think it's interesting that it was sort of this history of enlargement, and not small sort of 2-story extensions or little L's, but actually full height extensions. And continuing on, so just looking at the changes in the block context, 1911 on the top and 1955 on the bottom. And again, you can see sort of how, particularly in the lower right detailed plan, how these blocks this portion of the block began to be filled in. There's a full full depth extension at 50 Charles Street, which you can see right here. And also these are 2 3-story, one's pulled out at 2, but it's when you're in the backyard, you see it's a 3-story back building. So there's already quite a bit of density in this rear yard, even in the first half of the 20th century. Some historic photographs during the construction of the subway. This is an overall view on the left and a zoomed-in view on the right of the group, and the numbers are highlighted. So again, 48 is the building that had the full height extension originally, as it was. 50 seems to be the only one, or at least in the image, that still had its wood extension that you could see in that historic map. And then 52. And what's kind of interesting about 50 is that with the shutters on the top floor and the wood extension, you didn't even see the back of the house. You never saw any of the brick in that photograph, but you can see the sort of variety that existed, in particular, the full height extension at 40 in this photograph. What's also interesting is that following the cut of 7th Avenue, some owners recognized that the backs of their houses sort of became fronts also. They sort of gained a rear and front, they gained a front elevation. So the 2 images on the top of the slide are property on Commerce Street, and the one on the upper right at Bell Street. And soon after the cut was made, the backs of these houses were redesigned and given sort of a whole new personality. So 18 Commerce has this colonial revival alteration, which you can see on the lower left, on the left side of that photograph. And then 39 and 41 Barrow Street, also in the 1920s, gained this sort of Mediterranean or sort of mission revival style. So it's an interesting situation where we're very banal, simple exterior rear elevations that hadn't been visible. Once they became visible, they gained sort of a design facade. So the front of the house was the sort of typical 1840s row house of the village, and the back of the house, which almost didn't quite have a street elevation, it became a finished elevation. So in that context, I'll return back to our site and an existing block plan where you can see the 5 houses, 3 of which now have full height rear extensions. I talked about the one at 48, which was original to the row, the one at 54, which showed up on the map as early as 1859, and then the one on the left in the row at 56 was actually approved under a commission review in 2008. So in terms of thinking about the extensions, I think an appropriateness, something that's original. It was changed historically, and then it was also approved by the commission. To me, that's really builds a pretty clear support for a further change as an appropriate change. Some existing photographs of the back of 52 Charles. The photo in the middle, I think, just shows this is a very simple unarticulated brick elevation. We saw no evidence of any parapets, any corbelled parapets underneath that gutter. Very simple, and you can see on the upper left the photograph just illustrating the conditions in the rear of the yard. Again, very simple with no features, and that sort of sheer wall of that new building, that new triangular shaped building to the south. Looking to the west, so the first building is 54 with the 1850s extension, and then 56 with the commission approved extension. So these buildings basically were brought out to the same line as the original building that had the extension at 48. Elsewhere in the rear yards, now looking back on the left towards 7th Avenue, there's a full depth extension for a restaurant. I mean, you can see that, and it's mechanical equipment up on the top of that roof. And then looking at the other direction, a little hard to make out, but You can see the three-story back buildings and the density of what's happening sort of at the lower register of the lot. This is all just to show that this is not a sort of a pristine donut, as you might see elsewhere in the district. And just two other slides for context. So I mentioned on the far left, the commission approval for a full height extension at 56 Charles from 2008. And then an addition that has not been built, approved in 2016 directly to the west. So this image is from the presentation from 2016 that illustrates in yellow what the commission approved, which is a rooftop addition, full width addition. Has not been built. What we're proposing is considerably smaller than that. But we did think that was relevant in the overall context of this application. An existing and proposed site plan, just illustrating the areas of construction on the right in turquoise. The addition you can see doesn't extend full width across the roof, and then the extension off the back of the house with a projecting bay, which I'll mention and just describe in just a moment, and then a diagrammatic perspectival view to illustrate the scale of the extension, coplanar with the buildings directly to the west. And then the addition on the roof, which is set back 6 feet from the parapet. You'll see it in the plan. There's a 6-foot clearance here for FD&Y clearance, which you can see relative in the gray tone of the approved addition directly next door. So we were quite a bit smaller than what had been approved at 54 Charles Street. An elevation of the building proposed on the right. Again, the intent here really is to sort of lift the building back into that row on the street and to bring back that continuity. On the roof, we're proposing a small addition, set back 15 feet. It is not visible from the street. The only thing that's visible is a portion of these chimneys, and you'll see in photographs there are already visible chimneys adjacent, and we're just basically changing the alignment, but not necessarily adding too much of the visibility. But I'll also point out this setback. So the addition is held back from the parapet, which allows us to do two important things. One, obviously, it minimizes visibility from 7th Avenue, but it allows for clearance for FD&Y. So we don't have to have a ladder that goes up and over the addition. We also don't have to have a railing on the roof of the addition. So there's been a lot of thought that's gone into this proposal, and that's one component where we've given up some area to sort of improve sight lines and just appearance of the project. At the rear, again, you can see that offset of the addition, a simple railing that matches the railings directly in the two houses directly to the west. That top floor, which will align in plane with the adjacent buildings, but will carry that same multi-light configuration to sort of tie it in to the extension directly adjacent. And then we're proposing a shallow bay that's clad in a standing seam metal with multi-light windows on the floors below. And that's a shallow projection. And our thinking here is that instead of having an unarticulated brick facade, thinking about some of the elevations that I showed earlier in Commerce and Barrow, where these elevations were visible, we thought it was appropriate to add a little bit of articulation to this back of the house, since it is visible from the street. Side elevations, the rooftop construction is done in standing seam metal as well. You can see on the lower elevation, just a simple brick side wall. There's a 18-inch raised portion, which I'll describe more in the section, which is really derived from accommodating the elevator inside, and I'll share that with you in the section in just a moment. And you can see the chimneys, which are really just sort of a reconfiguration of what's there today. The existing section here and the proposed section. So a few things to point out. I'll start at the top and work my way down. The addition, as I mentioned, it's set back 15 feet from the roof. Mechanicals are tucked in behind the parapet. So there are no visible mechanicals from under the public way. The chimneys I've mentioned, and then the railing off the back, and the addition is now about 18 or 19 feet off the back of the house. All the structure, all the framing in the main house will remain. The only new framing is actually as part of the extension. So this is not a demo where we just preserve the facade and building behind it. We're retaining the framing behind the front facade back to the extension. And at the rear, there's very modest excavation of 2 feet in the back portion of the lot. The excavation is only under the house, and the shallow area here. And that's the existing plane. The ceiling height there is 6'2", and building mechanicals and things tucked in there. And we're leading to, I think, about 8'6" in the rest of the cellar. Just to point out the back extension. So as I mentioned, to accommodate the elevator. So the elevator does not go to the roof, and this was a purposeful decision because we needed that would increase visibility. The elevator goes just to the 3rd floor. There has to be a minimal overrun, and that's accommodated in the section of the roof above the extension. So under the railing, but it doesn't quite fit within the volume. That ceiling height is only 8.7 as it is. All the other ceilings below, the ceiling directly below has been reduced to 8 feet. So this fits within the sandwich, but I wanted to have a sort of flat roof. A single plane, there's an 18-inch extension at the parapet to sort of keep the enclosure and the shaft of the elevator sort of within the volume of the building. At the rear, as I mentioned, there's no excavation in the rear yard, and so that will be a sort of a plan for the area for the back of the house. Comparative sections, I think I've touched on most of the things, but you can see, again, currently the back of the house at the roof, because of the steep pitch of the roof, that's about 7 feet, 7'6". So we're only increasing that by about 1 foot. And the ceiling heights at the addition and the top floors are limited at about 8 feet and change. So quite modest in scale. Floor plans, I'll go through these relatively quickly. You can see this is cellar level. On the top, you can see the mechanicals set into the space that is not excavated and used, a habitable space where there's a modest amount of excavation to the south. Moving up the house, this is the basement. The first floor, you can see the shallow extension that you can see in elevation off the back of the house on the top left. And then I'll continue up to the roof because I think it's important just to see the roof condition. So this is the proposed roof plan on the upper left. Mechanicals tucked in on the upper right of the roof, right behind the parapet. Visible the clear space for fire department access on the south side, the east side of the roof. And this addition allows us to have a scheme allows us to have a very modest addition of about 350 square feet. They're very valuable. It gains an extra bedroom for the house with a stair turned 90 degrees from the floor of the row to allow for access to this upper floor. Just photographs illustrating the visibility of the relocated chimneys. So you can see the overall view on the left and view on the right. There are all visible chimneys currently. These are chimneys on the adjacent house. And these will be reconfigured so that what you see in that orange post is really what the visibility of the chimneys are. So that's the only visibility on the front facade. The roof addition is not visible from the street. A few other views of the chimney stack. So the view on the left is sort of a view really just to illustrate any sort of relative visibility of the changes, but also to show that these chimneys are features of the village landscape. There's, you see them throughout this photograph as you walk down the street. You see typically sort of black painted chimneys. There's even a very visible chimney, maybe a bit of chimney that's part of the new construction directly to the south. So very modest and no visibility, as I said, of the addition. So on the street facade, as I mentioned, the effect we need to restore bring the building back into continuity with its neighbors. I think that will be the main impact of this project on the historic district. At the rear, an existing view on the left and proposed on the right. And you can see the visibility, obviously at the rear, there's continuity between this house and its neighbors directly to the west and the back of the house at 48. The railing is consistent with the railings that were constructed directly to the west for those houses. And while the penthouse is, or the addition is visible, it's very modest in scale. We think it's well proportioned. It's a simple standing seam metal cladding, sort of neither historicizing or too contemporary in nature. And we think it's consistent with the other features that one sees in this sort of moment on 7th Avenue, whether it's the skylights directly to the east or some of the rooftop construction directly to the west. And as well, just thinking about the rear extension, we think that this block in particular and this row, given the changes that have occurred over time, would lend itself, as I said, these are components that you've seen in other applications. We think that this context does allow for this kind of change and an appropriate approach to this kind of application. Before we start, I know Jacob just wanted to say a couple of words because there's some important things about the way you presented the project, the way it's been received by the community that he'd like to address.
Good afternoon. My name is Jacob Frumpkin. Good afternoon to the commissioners and LPC staff. Thank you for the opportunity to address you. My wife, Christine, and I have lived in the village and the West Village since 2010. I've lived here since 1997, which, as great as the neighborhood is much longer than I care to remember. In 2016, our son was born, and he seems to like the village very much as well. We hope that we'll be able to play our part by restoring the facade of 52 Charles and to enlarge the house in a way that leaves this Charles streetscape untouched. We have worked very hard with a group of extremely talented people to keep the size of the addition, which is visible from 7th Avenue, in scale with that ad hoc view. It is very important to us to be good neighbors in as many ways as we can. It was just 2 more paragraphs. It was for that reason that we were gratified when Community Board 2, by a unanimous vote, endorsed our proposal. We were also gratified that the community board, which is made up of our neighbors who devote a great deal of time and effort to preserving our community, offered design suggestions. We incorporated both of their suggestions, or I should say, the architects did, and we think the project is better off for having done so. I hope you will agree that our proposal will be a welcome addition to the neighborhood, and I thank the commissioners and the LPC staff for the attention they have given to it.
All right, thank you. Commissioners, do we have any questions? Yes, Commissioner Goldman.
What is the metal of the standing seam?
What is the metal?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to have introduce yourself.
Yeah. It's a standing seam metal roof. My name's Michael Schmidt. I'm the architect for the project. And the question is, what's the metal? The metal is a standing seam metal roof with a zinc finish. It's like a zinc colored finish on it.
So it's not a paint, it's
Yeah, I mean, that's our,
anodized or electronic.
yeah, it's a tight finish on it, yes.
All right, other questions? Yes, Commissioner Jefferson.
Question about the bay window. I got your architectural explanation for the 3 stories, but I didn't try to understand why the bay window.
The bay, As Cass mentioned in his kind of historical analysis of this piece of property, this isn't it's a true rear facade, but it's sort of got a split personality. The personalities are suddenly 7th Avenue comes blasting through and opens the back facade, which was never meant to be seen, to a street. Now, there's a 1-story addition that partially covers it, but our idea was to kind of address that idea of the facade that has now become sort of a quasi front facade as well. So our design for the rear facade was to carry the top floor windows across identically to the next building and the way the other row houses do it, but do a little below that. And we proposed originally a 2-foot projecting front facade bay, but we softened it to 1 foot based on some community board hearings, the community board hearing suggestions. And as you could see in the previous slides, I think it's 56. These rear extensions, once you get down on the lower floors, below the top floor, there's a desire to have more light and air to be closer to the rear yard. We just put that same idea and combined it into a bay window that projects 1 foot on the rear facade and goes up 3 floors. So it's this single element that it incorporates the doors from the basement level, which is really just below grade, the large windows from the parlor level, and then smaller windows in the 3rd floor, which is the main bedroom floor of the space, as a single.
So the setback from the edge.
Yes, it is.
Is 1 foot? Is that all?
It projects 1 foot and setback from the edge about 2.5 feet, something.
2.5 feet.
It's symmetrical if we find the elevation. There you go. You see?
Thank you.
It's a substantial pier width on either side. Perhaps that was what you were asking about in terms of the edges of the bay.
Thank you.
Other questions? All right, let's move to public testimony. We don't have any signups for in person, but I just want to confirm there's nobody in the room who wishes to speak on this item. If so, raise your hand. All right, we'll move to our participants. I'll turn it over to Stephen to do that.
Thank you, Commissioner. We have 2 registered participants to testify via Zoom today. The first is Shannon Smiley, followed by Jeremy Woodoff. Shannon Smiley, if you could please use the raise hand function, I will elevate you to panelist.
Messages.
Okay, Shannon Smiley, once promoted to panelist, we ask that you unmute yourself and state your name for the record, and you will have 3 minutes to speak.
Good day, Commissioners. My name is Shannon Smiley, and I am speaking on behalf of Village Preservation. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. Village Preservation feels that in this extremely unusual case, where 2 visible full-height extensions have been present at the row for more than a century, a full-height rear yard addition may be acceptable at the subject property. This must not set a precedent for full-height additions at any other location within the historic district. However, the proposed projecting metal bay window is inappropriate. Instead, the design of the visible rear facade should be simplified to feature a standard 3-bay fenestration pattern with double hung multi-light windows, and the depth of the extension should not exceed that of its neighbor. The height of the proposed rear parapet or roof should also be lowered so that the roof line matches 54 Charles Street. The rooftop addition should also be made less prominent by reducing its height and/or footprint. And if there is any leeway to push it closer to the front of the building while remaining non-visible over the primary facade, that should be done in order to minimize the overall visibility as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Our next participant will be Jeremy Woodoff. Jeremy Woodoff, I will move you to the role of panelist, after which we ask for you to unmute yourself, state your name for the record, and you will have 3 minutes to testify.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Jeremy Woodoff, speaking for the Victorian Society, New York. The Victorian Society opposes this full-height rear yard addition, which would obliterate the entire historic rear facade. There is a reason rear yard additions extending the building's full height typically aren't found appropriate, even when not visible from the public way. This one would be very visible south. The proposal should be denied. And I'd like to add to our prepared testimony that it appears that the very lengthy presentation was designed to persuade the commission that because so much had been altered, here are the buildings and 7th Avenue South, that it's okay to destroy this part of this building. We take the opposite view. We think it's actually very interesting and important to be able to see an original rear facade, not something that we see every day, but that is very important. And another reason why we feel the proposal should be denied. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Do we have any other participants logged onto the Zoom who did not previously register to submit testimony? If you could, please use the raise hand function and we will call you to the floor. Once again, if anyone else attending via Zoom would like to testify now, please use the raise hand function. Okay, I'd also like to note for the record that we received written confirmation from Councilmember Eric Botcher that he is in support of this application. I'd also like to provide more clarity to the previously mentioned Manhattan Community Board 2 recommendation. Manhattan Community Board 2 recommended approval of the front facade restoration, approval of the rear facade design and windows, provided that the depth of the bay window is considerably reduced, approval of the rooftop addition, denial of the modern design roof railing, and recommendation in its place a simple steel railing typical to similar houses in the district. Approval of the cellar excavation, provided that care is taken not to endanger the building or the neighboring buildings. That concludes Manhattan Community Board 2's recommendation.
Great, thank you very much. Would you like to respond to the comments we've heard?
Yeah, thank you. Just briefly, I think one point I want to make is that we met with the community board in May, so the presentation that you saw today was in response to those comments. So the railing, the request is actually to make the railing look like the railings at 54 and 56. So that adjustment is shown here. And they asked for a substantial reduction in the depth of the bay window. It was 2 feet. It was reduced by 50% to 1 foot. So we did respond, and I think Jacob mentioned sort of the importance of sort of keeping the community involved in this and the importance of their support. I do want to just address the other two sets of testimony. I think I hopefully made the point that this extension in this location within this row of 5 is appropriate. We recognize we're here enough. We know the importance of maintaining the top floor of these row houses to retain the continuity of those rows. This is actually sort of the flip side of that coin, and that maintaining continuity is actually acceptable by pulling it out, as opposed to just having a 2-story addition. If you had a 2-story extension and then kept that back, it would sort of you'd never have the continuity that we're moving toward here. So I wanted to just make that point, and then. I think regarding the first testimony, I know that the addition, as it's been the volume, it only has an 8-foot interior ceiling height. It's very modest in height. It's small in scale. It's a sort of recessive treatment with a standing seam metal. And it's been designed volumetrically, as I've mentioned, in a way to sort of keep it out away from the east parapet to minimize the visibility and to eliminate any need for rooftop features like railings or ladders. So we think collectively the extension ties into the history, obviously, of the rear yard extensions, and the roof as well ties into the recent approvals for the adjacent building and other rooftop construction at the adjacent buildings in this immediate row. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. All right, commissioners, do we have any final questions? All right, let's make a motion to close the hearing. Commissioner Lefty, would you make a motion to close the hearing? So moved. Thank you. Commissioner Jefferson, would you second that motion? Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the hearing is closed and we'll begin our discussion. So this is for a full height rear yard addition that we read along with a historical addition, previously commission approved addition. The applicant noted that the row was originally built with a full height rear extension. And then the second component is for a rooftop addition that is partial width. And it's seen through the back in this gap along 7th Avenue South above taxpayers. And I think we have seen very often that in 7th Avenue cut through those blocks, we get these odd shaped lots that provide these unique views into the former donut. In this case, the donut has also been developed with some back houses and it's I think has a combination of building types and density that reflects the evolution of this site. So we'll begin our discussion. Commissioner Goldblum, would you like to start this one?
Sure. I think that Cass makes a very strong argument, and the visuals make a very strong argument in favor of the full height rear addition. My only qualm is that my understanding of our general preference to retain the existing original top floor of the building is less about contextual uniformity from an aesthetic perspective and more about, or at least as much about, the retention of a sense of the volume of the original building. And I think from that perspective, the case for me has not been made that this building should lose its volumetric integrity to the extent that is proposed. So I'm okay with I think, you know, the rooftop addition is modest. I'm thinking about that other project that was up the block or something that we saw a few weeks ago. That was much less modest and much more noticeable, perhaps because of its position relative to the cut. I don't know exactly why, but perhaps because of the height, there were some issues with it. But yeah, I think this is relatively more modest and therefore more acceptable. And I think that the setback off of the east party wall is helpful in that regard. So I can accept everything except for the top floor of the existing of the proposed.
All right. And I think, it's this, our review of rear yard additions has sort of put equal weight on the continuity of the row and the legibility of that continuity in the row and the sense of the original volume. So there have been lots of cases where we found that the row didn't have a sense of continuity and we have allowed full height rear yard additions. So I completely understand the desire to see it retain its top floor, but I think for me, the fact that the row originally had deeper full height additions, and then historically some were added, and then the commission approved some, that I think achieving that uniformity here works for me. But I understand
it makes a very good case, and aesthetically the case is very strong, and historically the case is strong. But for me, it kind of falls to the same category of brownstone removal, or stoop removals, right? Stoop removals are a recognized part of New York City history, and there are some examples where we have actively pursued the retention of modified facades, but I don't think that we would approve a removal of a stoop today in order to create an intervention similar to those that were done in the 1920s, even though we view it as historically significant. And to a certain extent, we do freeze things, or at least chill things.
Yeah.
This I think for me is a chill point.
Okay, and I respect that. I think for me, it's different than a stoop. I think it's a secondary facade and a secondary view into it. And we have approved full height rear yard additions where there isn't consistent legibility of that uniformed top floor. So, okay, Commissioner Ginsburg.
I've been
I understand Commissioner Goldman's concerns, but I think skills is appropriate. Addition is also appropriate.
Okay. Right, and I do think the partial width of that rooftop addition and the neutral materials do help it to not overwhelm the building. Commissioner Lutfi?
To be honest, I agree with Michael about Tom's not actually aspect of the day, and I don't think that we address the problem with that.
Okay. Commissioner Jefferson?
This one has been a dilemma for me. This one has been a dilemma for me because on the one hand, I understand the historical, keeping a piece of it. On the other hand, the idea of a row is important, and the idea that there are 4 buildings that go full height. So here, conflict. But what changed my mind was this window, this opening. And I asked myself, what would I want to see if I was walking down that street? Would I rather see a 2-story building setback or a one that carries the alignment across? And I went with the alignment across, the 3rd story.
So you're
You would support the full height rear yard addition to align with the adjacent ones? Okay.
I question the bay window though, because I think it's an extreme. It's, the argument was to have the back facade consistent with the other. And now they're saying, no, I'm going to make it inconsistent.
Right.
I don't want that. If you get that, you have to be consistent.
Right. Okay. Commissioner Master?
I think that the full height rear addition is appropriate.
Okay, given the context and the view. All right. Okay, so yes.
Sorry, the construction and the roof.
Yes, the rooftop addition.
I think it's fine. I think it's visible, but I can accept it.
Okay. And you're comfortable with the rooftop addition? Okay. Okay, so I think, I think this is something that does sort of test our review, our past regulatory action and on regulatory actions on rooftop and rear yard additions. And I think our mixed comments reflect the seriousness that we take when we look at these types of applications. So we don't have enough to vote for it either way today. We do have 4 in support of the proposal as presented. But there have been some comments about the details, the bay window in that design. And so we'll ask you to, we'll take no action since we can't take an action. We'll ask you to come back perhaps when we have more commissioners, and maybe you can rethink some of those designs and some of the other aspects of it that might make some other commissioners comfortable. Okay, great. Thanks.
I will now move to the next item. It's public hearing item number 3. LPC 23-04861, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, block 1211, lot 50, 140 West 81st Street, the Upper West Side, Central Park West Historic District. This is a Romanesque Revival style church building designed by John F. Capon and built in 1893. The application is to apply a coating on the masonry facade.
So how do I? Hello, good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Excel Zamuli. I'm here on behalf of DXA Studio. I'm the project manager that's overseeing construction over at 140 West 81st Street. I'm sorry. How do I take this information? Oh, there we go. Okay. And so today we come to you for a bit of an amendment to our previous certificate of no effect. And so first I wanted to kind of give a brief recap of the project. Oh, it's a bit of a delay. Okay. So this is the map that's located in the Central Park West District, Central Park West Historic District.
And it is built in 1881, and it is, as mentioned previously, a Romanesque revival style church, which is the street facing facade mostly has rusticated stone brickwork, terracotta tiles, and copper. And as far as the proposals, so we're looking to this revivalist church. It's essentially getting, so part of the approved scope was, restoring the facade. And then there's a minorly visible addition here in the penthouse that was also approved. And then program wise, the assignment was kind of to give the church a new life by giving the congregation a new space, and then there will be housing on top. So what we are asking for today is we would like to add a kind mineral stain onto the existing rock face. So these are some recent photos that were taken that kind of show close-ups of the brickwork. There's everything from copper to lime deposits as well as gypsum. So the lime and the copper deposits are workable. Really, our concern is the gypsum deposits that you're seeing on the left. These have been a result of kind of older vehicular, gasoline, diesel, things like that. And essentially what I learned this somewhat recently, but essentially the pollution from older cars, when met with water, turns into this gypsum kind of dark deposit. And because of the porous nature of the rock face, it lodged itself in there. And the next 3 pages, I kind of breeze through it, but essentially we've been working with the Jablonski building conservationists, and we have over the years tested out 16 different cleaning techniques approved by them. They've ranged from everything from, very light chemical cleaning, treatments to misting, which was our latest one, which you can kind of see here. There was a big swath where we did it. We left it over, I believe it was over 72 hours as per the kind of prescribed time. And then power washed at a certain pressure. We tried that several times and it yielded no results. And therefore, Jablonski building conservationists then suggested that we go to a Keim or Beek product. So what you're seeing here are some of the swatches from this Keim product. The one on the left is the one that is our preference, but we mocked up both, and there, as you can see, quite close to the color of the masonry. This is really just to show the location of the mock-up that we executed. As always, we tend to look for kind of something minimally visible from the street. And the result is what you see here. So there's a few kind of close-up shots. And essentially, as mentioned before, we tried both swatches and we also tried them at different dilution ratios. So what you're seeing, you can kind of see it better on the image on the right. So the S119 tells you the swatch. So there was S119 and S117. And then the 1:1, 1:2 is the ratio between the stain and the kind of dilution. And you can see kind of as you go down, so 1:1 being the least diluted to the most diluted at 1:8 at the bottom. And you can kind of see the gypsum deposits kind of gradually, being less and less visible behind. And here are some more close-ups. We also want to note, so a couple of things to know. One is we're only doing this to the bricks and not the limestone. The limestone is not being touched, as you can see in the image on the right. And then the other thing is, we felt this was a good approach because traditionally a lot of these types of buildings that have kind of that rock face brick, the design intent behind them was that the grout and the brick had a very similar color. And again, if I'm putting my architect hat on from 1881, I would not anticipate that cars would become as what they did, and the result to the brick that happened. And this, again, this is just to show, this was one year of the community board hearing. So the image on the left is actually from 2014, so it's a little outdated. We do have currently scaffolding up, so it was a little difficult to get kind of broader images of what the brick looks like now. But, you know, as previously shown in those details, they're kind of very representative of what's happening throughout, where it's just very, very different, you know, throughout the whole facade. And that's it. That's our request.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we have some questions. Commissioner Goldblum.
Okay, so your proposal is to tint the bricks,
Correct.
and the bricks are clay bricks. They're like made of clay. And the purpose of the state of doing it is to have it look nicer, because the black doesn't look so nice.
So that's a component. There's also protection in the future from more pollutants.
So
It's also a maintenance issue.
So how does the presence of the current condition affect the ongoing maintenance and stability of the bricks?
I'm sorry, can you
In other words, leaving it alone, what's going to happen? How are you making the building better by sealing it?
First to note, it's technically not sealing it. So this is an important. Yeah, okay, because it's an important distinction.
The point is that the Kind mineral coating is a breathable coat.
Right. Yes. Thank you. So again, it's in a way kind of future proofing. You know, we can't, you know, especially with the last, I mean, we could talk about the couple of weeks ago and the air and fires and things that we've had in the air. And so this is kind of meant to not just, you know, help restore and give new life to the building by kind of bringing it back to what we thought the original design intent was, but also to kind of future proof any atmospheric or, you know, building, you know, erosions or anything like that.
Could that preventative effect be achieved with a clear stain?
Some of it, I mean, you know, as far as the gypsum that's already there, you know, that it would not address that issue.
Is there any concern that the gypsum being there in any way degrades the brick in a long-term sense, or is it just aesthetics?
I think it is mostly aesthetic in that sense. Yes.
Okay. And do you have any visual evidence or otherwise that shows that the original building was intended in some way to have a relatively uniform finish, or where the brick would be lighter than it currently is? You know, how do we as the custodians of the building from a preservation perspective know that the aesthetic intent was, you know, apart from just knowing that it wasn't black at the beginning, but there was a specific intent about the color relative to the limestone?
Right. So, well, one thing would be tax lot photo, which I didn't think to add in here, which obviously would be in gray, but that would even be difficult because at that time the gypsum probably would have been in there. The other is just our own, you know, DXA's research that has shown anytime we've encountered rock face that it tends to be because it's so textured. That the color variation is not so much from the material itself, but rather the shadows that it's casting.
Thank you.
Right, other questions?
What are we supposed to decide?
Okay, so this is a rock face brick and stone facade on this beautiful church on the Upper West Side that in the several years ago, the commission approved a conversion of this church to housing above with some church space in it. So it was, I think, a very successful approach for a house of worship that had a smaller congregation and mission-driven housing. And since then, they've been doing the work, but the facade has become very dirty from pollutants. And they have tried, I think she said, 16 different methods of cleaning using Jablonski Building Conservation Associates or conservationists. And none of the cleaning methods have been effective in removing that black dirt. And so they are proposing a breathable mineral coating They tested different samples of different dilutions to give the building a cleaner appearance, since the cleaning won't work. And I think that what she has stated is that they believe the original design intent was to have mortar and the rock face brick be the same color as the limestone below, giving it a more monolithic appearance. So a coating that would give it more of a monolithic appearance would be appropriate. So that is what has been presented to us. Right, so we have to determine whether it is appropriate to coat the historic masonry. And the staff is not authorized to approve coatings on uncoated masonry. And so that's a decision for us. And so the first question is, will it serve an aid in the long-term preservation of the building, or not at least do damage in the long term for the masonry? And this is a breathable coating. And then the second question is, aesthetically, does it detract from, or is it in keeping with the design intent? So I think that's what she's tried to address in her presentation. Okay, other questions?
Can you explain the two colors? I missed how the two colors are played out.
So those were basically the two swatches, that Keim offers, that we felt were closest. So to know the stone is from the site, and it is minimally polluted. And so we felt it was a good way to color match. So essentially, there were two different options. Yeah, and we felt that the one on the left, was a closer match once you kind of take in all the shadows and things that it will cast.
And did you try different dilutions for both of the colors?
Yes. Yeah,
and the one on the left. And which composition or dilution did you settle on?
So the one at the very top is the one that we are going for. It's the S119. So the lighter of the two swatches, and it's a 1-to-1 stain to dilution ratio. And if I zoom in, whoops. Oh, here we go. So in the close up on the left, you can kind of see that. So the kind of the top half of the picture there is the 1-to-1, and the lower half is the 1-to-2. And you can kind of see, it's quite the difference.
Okay. All right, other questions? Okay.
There is a technical side to this, which is, this is obviously a product that's been tested before, then there are dangers, and that the first thing this has is going to danger.
That's right.
Fabric.
Right.
If we're okay with that, then it's an aesthetic.
That's correct.
And because of the different grades of dilution, you can affect the intensity of that effect as well. Because I saw your different chart, you had different dilutions that created different.
So my understanding of the way the Keim products works, my apologies, is that the diluter is also one of their products. You don't dilute it in just like water or anything. You dilute it in a Keim product as well. So despite the dilution, you have a similar protection.
Could you go to the other picture? Because it is a stain. A stain means that there's pigment, which means the more concentration, the more pigment is on the material. And that's simple, that you can actually decide how extreme you want to be. So there can be a balance of the aesthetic, to pair with the benefits of this technical. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, so you're proposing the 1-to-5%.
Yes.
And what happens to the stone portion? How's that treated?
So the limestone actually can be cleaned. Is it me? That's.
It's on
What was I saying? So the limestone is actually being treated via those 16 kind of previously mentioned. The limestone reacts to those. It's specific to the rock face.
Okay, so now it's a discussion of what you do to the brick so that it doesn't create too much of a contrast if the intent is to be more monolithic. And that's the combination you're trying to present.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Okay, other questions? All right, let's move to public testimony. And we do have one speaker who signed up here, Lucy Levine.
Commissioners, my name is Lucy Levine. I'm speaking on behalf of the Historic Districts Council. HDC is curious to understand why the building needs to look new or more uniform in appearance. While we're aware of the appropriateness of the kind of material for this sort of application, we question whether it's needed at all. Is this request being driven by any need to prevent water intrusion into the building's envelope, or is it simply an aesthetic consideration on the part of the owner? HGC would need to have a better explanation as to the purpose of this proposed work in order to render a more thorough opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak this item? All right, we'll move on to participants. So, Gregory.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair Carroll. I think that we have a few signups in advance. I ask all of them now to raise their hands so I could call on them, including Madge Rosenberg from CB7. The first person we'll be hearing from is Megan Fitzpatrick from Landmark West. So Megan, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hello, Commissioners. Megan Fitzpatrick for Landmark West. The Landmark West Certificate of Appropriateness Committee appreciates that the test results of the cleaning method were unsatisfactory. While Keim coatings are often used to unify the appearance of masonry and serve as a protective layer to repel inclement weather, the sampling of the test areas show differing levels of staining on the masonry. We are concerned that the application of a sodium silicate coating, which may appear benign at first, is very much a last resort treatment, and the heavier staining is likely to transfer through over time, making recoating difficult and costly. The Landmark West Certificate of Appropriateness Committee would like to see the applicant explore more methods of cleaning the masonry that might yield better results, and further testing before committing to this very final and irreversible step in the restoration process. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Okay. Next up, we'll be hearing from Madge Rosenberg from Manhattan Community Board 7. So Madge Rosenberg, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Madge Rosenberg, Community Board 7. We approved this because we believe that it would be protective for the building and aesthetically pleasing. We were unable to see the actual brickwork because the building has been so completely covered with scaffolding. But from the samples we saw from the applicant, it looked to us like it was going to be something that was going to keep the brick from spalling and crumbling, and also make a unified appearance on the front, on the facade.
Thanks so much for your testimony. Okay. Okay. Next up, we'll be hearing from Jeremy Woodoff from VSNY. So Jeremy Woodoff, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Good afternoon again, Commissioners. My name is Jeremy Woodoff for the Victorian Society, New York. Keim masonry coatings have a long and successful history. We don't object to their use to solve specific problems. In this case, a fully opaque product is needed in order to cover the stubborn stains on the bricks. But this opaque coating will also cover the mortar joints. And on a brick facade, the coating will obscure the significant texture these joints provide. Opaque coatings would more typically be used where mortar joints aren't significant, such as on large stone block or stucco facades. The coating will also obscure any natural variability among bricks and within individual bricks. We also have some concern about the proposed color. It's impossible to determine with online images how close the match is. In some views, the bricks look like a warm buff color, while the coating looks gray. We think it's essential to view the sample application in person before a decision is made, and a larger test panel may be required for a good assessment. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And next up, we'll be hearing from Lopez Ferna. So Lopez Ferna, I am promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you. Hello, Lopez Ferna, are you with us? I am requesting you unmute. Okay, he's declined to be promoted to panelist. Okay, it seems as though Lopez Ferna is having difficulties signing on. So, and I do not see any other attendees with their hands raised. So I will just note for the record that one additional individual recommended denial for this application. And I'll bring it back to you, Chair Carroll.
All right, thank you. So we've heard some support and some opposition. Would you like to respond to those comments?
Yeah, if I may, just a couple of thoughts. Some of them we spoke about during the presentation, so wanted to reiterate. So one of the testimonials, I believe, was from Landmark West about other means of testing. We're happy to provide more documentation. We believe that we've done all the testing that is possible without actively damaging the rock face, right? You could always up the chemical intake or up the water pressure, but there is a limit before it becomes actively detrimental to the fabric that's there. Jablonski building conservationists have been in the field for, decades, and they know their stuff. So we always defer to them. And so if we believe, we're always happy to share more information if needed. But we do believe that if they're stumped, then so are we, that we've exhausted all our options. The other question was about, I believe it was HDC that spoke about, the uniformity, making it look like new, all that. And again, it is based on our architectural research. DXA Studio has done quite a bit of, we're in here all the time, actually. We've done quite a bit of a few historic preservation projects. And we do believe, based on our research, that the rock face, brick, and mortar are meant to match in color. And so we don't believe that kind of coating the whole thing detracts. We actually think it kind of is in line with the original design intent. Really, it's we never want to erase history, so to speak. Really, the assignment here, as I mentioned, kind of the beginning, is that we're really trying to give this building a new life by revitalizing the facade, and giving the congregation new space, as well as more housing. So as and this is kind of part of it. We want the facade to reflect that. So.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, any final questions? Yes, Commissioner.
It was for staff. Is it the staff's opinion that the brick in its current condition is warrants a repair of this nature from a historic preservation perspective? In other words, is the building aesthetically or otherwise disfigured by this in a way that makes it historically, from a preservation perspective, impaired or bad?
Well, I mean, that's pretty subjective question, I think, in general. I think there are other cases where, this product in particular, other versions of it, as has been pointed out, have been used for over 100 years. And I'm sure in some cases that was as part of refreshing as much as it may have been to actually help with some sort of performance problem. And I think the keys, I think what the staff is considering is that the application of the product will be fully breathable, just like the underlying masonry. It will result in a uniform appearance, which again, if one thinks back to the original design intent, that may be something that's desirable. And some buildings may choose to maintain their buildings much more frequently and always have that look. Others maybe don't have the funds or don't want to, and they pick up the patina. And perhaps both of those are kind of valid legacies for a building. But at the end of the day, we think the product would not necessarily harm the building, especially, and I'm not sure if this is the case, if they were to still thoroughly clean it, remove as much of the incrustation as they could before they apply the stain, that would probably arrest any further kind of accumulation of that particular issue. And that could be a long-term issue if it's not addressed. We have not heard from the applicant that it's currently an issue, the soiling and the incrustation, but I know for other materials like travertine and marbles, it definitely can be. I don't know about a dense brick like this one. We don't see this very often. So it really is one of those things where it's kind of subjective, and I think that's reflected in our talking points.
But I would say that, we do, when buildings are extremely soiled and dirty, we have found that is deleterious and sort of detracts from the architecture. So we welcome the cleaning of the dirty facades. And I think that buildup of soil long-term over a long period of time can potentially cause damage, again, depending on the type of material. So I think we welcome the cleaning of facades. And I think the situation you find yourself in here is that they've tried 16 different types of cleaning methods and none have worked with this particular soiling or pollutant. So I think, again, that's where we are. Yes, Commissioner Lutfi.
Sorry if you address this, but I guess one of the questions for me is,
Mark, she uses this one.
yeah, I use this one. Thank you. I guess one of the questions for me is that since it's a stain, what does it look? Sometimes you stain something and it doesn't look like the natural, whatever it is, wood or stone or so. What does it look like? In a way, it wouldn't be so bad to see it, an example of it, because it's permanent. So once you do it, if it has one like sort of like an artificial look to it, it might not be so great.
Well, I mean, I would say it's different than a coating that forms a film. So it won't have sort of a plasticky effect that bridges cracks and gaps and small grains like a film probably would. It actually bonds to the substrate material. And therefore, I think it allows just the minimum amount of attachment to that and probably does let the texture and all of the different variety of the material show through much better. But will it look different than what we see now or the natural material? Sure. And I think what they're proposing to dilute it a little bit helps give it a little bit of translucency, but it still will, may not look natural.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so I wonder if the applicant can also answer the question about the durability of the stain. And so does it need to be reapplied or will it last for a long period of time? If it fades off, does that maybe potentially return it to its unstained appearance?
That's a great question. I actually meant to bring that up earlier. Somebody mentioned earlier that it does actually bond. So it's a silicate binder, so it actually chemically bonds to the material. And so in a way becomes one with the brick. And so the lifespan of it is quite long and does require minimal maintenance. The other thing I did want to bring up as well, it is resistant to pollutants and other things I mentioned, talked about future proofing earlier. And then one more point I did want to bring up, somebody also mentioned like waterproofing, water resistance, and the way that it works is because the way it binds itself, it still allows for water to come in and out. So our vapor barrier, water barrier, all of that is happening behind the brick. So the brick is still breathing. It is still acting as it would, as masonry would. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, thank you. Other questions? Any other final questions?
One quick one.
Yes.
How long before you have to recoat? New York City, for example.
That might be something I would have to confirm with the. Yeah, I'm meaning to confirm. My understanding is, again, because it's a chemical bond and it's not like an applied paint, or, it becomes part of the brick. So my understanding is.
It doesn't.
I don't really want to say a number because I'm not a kind manufacturer, but my understanding is it's decades. It's very long.
Right. So it doesn't peel off and have to
Correct.
be repainted. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's starting to get dark again. When you have to then recoat it, it's fair.
Well, I can't speak for the environmental future of New York City,
But it's a good question. Will the pollutants be
reabsorbed? It's meant to protect
as it turns down.
It's meant to. They do say it protects and is resistant to future pollutants.
Okay.
It says that right in the spec sheet. So.
Okay.
If the commission needs a specific number of years or something, we can talk to Chaim about the warranty and how long, reapplication would need to be and things like that. We need to follow up with that.
All right. Thank you. All right. Other questions? Okay, let's move to close the hearing. Commissioner Chen, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
And Commissioner Ginsburg, would you second that?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the hearing is closed and we'll begin our discussion about coating the brick on this building. And so this is an interesting discussion. And I think, we have, as we've heard from the testimony, that Chaim is a long tested material. We know that it is breathable and won't cause damage to the masonry. And so in many ways, this is, as Commissioner Chu suggested, more of an aesthetic question. Applicants have made the argument that the facade had an original intent was a more monolithic appearance with the brick and the mortar matching in color. And they have shown different grades or dilutions of the staining, which could also address that as monolithic quality. And then I think there was also a good question about whether it will prevent further pollutants and become dirty as well, which it seems that the spec sheet says that it does prevent, at least for some period of time, further pollutants. So we'll begin our discussion. Commissioner Chu, would you like to start this one?
Sure. My concern is just that when you put the product on, you are in fact changing it because you are pigmenting it. I think that's maybe a concern that my other commissioners may share. And that's really what it comes down to, because you're altering the fabric. And that does bring with it some risk. It's not a technical need for the building. Clearly, the facade seems like it's in great shape. It looks great. It's just dirty. And the thing that comes to mind for me is the cathedral in Cologne. It's a really dark Gothic, but amazingly beautiful church. And it has a lot of pollutants on it. It's dark, and some sense it gives it some character. I think in this case, I would fall back to our duty to protect the fabric of the historic structure, and therefore I do feel that that we shouldn't stain this whole building, which is essentially painting it. That's my feeling.
Thank you. Okay. Commissioner Goldblum?
I agree.
Okay, Commissioner Ginsburg?
I'm torn, but I think what is the first case, do nothing may be the better solution here. So I'm fine with that.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chen, I know you came in late. Have you?
Yeah, I just came in from the press conference sweating, so I apologize.
Okay, Commissioner Ludwig?
I agree.
Okay, Commissioner Jefferson?
I can technically accept the stain, but I'm not quite sure what the rest of it, the aesthetic.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Master?
Yeah, this is a difficult decision. Because at first I thought I was a proponent of the stain because, you know, they wanted it to look clean, which is why they went so far as to try so many different methods. But, you know, I think I would defer to the other commissioners and say perhaps if that there's a risk that maybe we should refrain.
Okay, great. Thank you. And so I think where we are today is we don't have any support for the application as presented today. I think we can take no action if you want to do some further studies and work with Jablonski a little bit more and either on some cleaning methods or other information on the materials just to ensure that there would be no further damage and that it would be technically supportive of the long-term preservation of the building. But as we've heard, as the information has been presented today, I don't think we have the support for it. So thank you. And we'll move to the next item.
The next item is public hearing item number 4, LPC 23-10928, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, block 1494, lot 72, 1014 Fifth Avenue, the Metropolitan Museum Historic District. It's a Beaux-Arts style townhouse designed by Welch Smith and Perrott and built in 1906 to 07. The application is to amend work previously approved under LPC 23-00224 to modify doors, install signage, alter the areaway, and replace sidewalk pavers. Hello. Try it again. Hello. Can you hear me now? No. I have a hard day. It's been. Oh, thank you. This is better. Okay.
So good afternoon. My name is Sebastian Kemp. I'm partner at Caro Architects, together with Anke Rottenburg, who is here in the room as well. We're the architect of record for the project 1014 Fifth Avenue. And the design architect is David Chipperfield Architects in London. And we do have remotely here with us Matt Ball, design director at Chipperfield Architects, and Harriet Bartlett, the project architect for this project. We also put together this nice deck of slides that I'm going to present today. In the room, we also have Carol Rosenthal, partner at Fried Frame. And I'm not sure if Robert Portner from Paratus Group is joining us. They are the project manager or project director. The please. So 1014 Fifth Avenue
Located in the Metropolitan Museum Historic District. In fact, it's located right across from the Metropolitan Museum, as you see here in this red rectangle. The project has been presented last September 2022 and had received a status update letter with approval with stipulations for staff review on October 11th, 2022. Refinements have been made to address the LPC stipulations, but also to improve the existing egress stair from the basement at the northern front of the building. The sidewalk pavement materials were also revised. So we're here today to only talk about the proposed amendments, which are a revised egress stair, a relocated stone bench, signage, and also a change in sidewalk paving material. The two renderings on the front facade ground floor show side by side the approved proposal from last year and the new proposal presented today. You can see that the entry canopy and the vitrine were removed and the window has changed from metal to painted wood as per the stipulations in the approval from last October. The basement stair was pulled out into the sidewalk, received a limestone balustrade masking the areaway, and the proposed bench was rotated down to the south side. There is the existing basement stair that got revised and improved for egress, the bench that needs to be relocated as a result of that, and the limestone paving changing to granite. And this plan shows how the actual proposed design changes. The improved egress stair centered on the window above, entering the building through the basement window below, utilizing its existing lintel. I will show more photographs that explains that a little better. The plan also shows the 5x5 granite pavers now introduced instead of the softer limestone that we had before. The bench has been relocated to accommodate the stair reconfiguration. And the outside vitrine moved to the inside of the vestibule and changed its shape, but it's no longer part of the front of the building. Following with some more background information on the proposed design of the egress stair, balustrade, and bench as a new ensemble shaping for the front of the building. It's important to know that the original 1906 residence actually had an external basement stair with light well and stoop. Our approach for the front of the building taps into that history and attempts to create a more welcoming, more structured front area instead of the naked, empty sidewalk it has become after the 1920s renovation. Here are some more archive materials from the original architects that the research is based on. It shows the original building with a front yard ensemble that is that this Beaux-Arts facade was actually designed for. In comparison, here's the condition of the ground floor facade as it presents itself today. Zooming into the areaway that was created in the 1920s, we find this arrangement unfit as an egress path for the building. And this is close-up images of the stair going down to the basement. The existing steel stair sits within the building footprint in between two limestone cheek walls, a narrow, steep winder unfit for proper egress. The proposed code-compliant egress stair utilizes an existing window centered on the first floor window. You see that in the center image and in the right image a little bit. So the cheek wall seen here on the right remains in place, and a new cheek wall will be added to the left in order to serve the symmetry of this new areaway. Both cheek walls extend into the sidewalk area to open up a landing and further extend just enough to support the new stone balustrade. So this concept sketch shows what I've just described with the new staircase centered on the window and the two cheek walls coming out to create the landing and coming out to also support the new balustrade. So the sketch of the new areaway shows how the new limestone balustrade is integrated with the existing facade by interlocking with the extended limestone cheek walls, which frame the egress stair. The new stone elements subtly reference existing facade details, in particular the rounded rustication details, corbels, openings, and balconies that you see here on these detailed photos. The next two slides illustrate the two schemes, the approved and the proposed as viewed from the south, and I'm going to toggle back and forth a bit to clearly highlight the modifications proposed, previously approved in the last year, today's proposal. The section drawing through the vestibule looking south is to show the new limestone balustrade and its rounded top, referencing the detailing in the existing facade elements. It also presents the elevation of the small pivot gate at the stair, using the same language as the tall entrance gate. Another section through the basement stair looking north shows the new stair using the existing lintel and the head clearance that was achieved by using the existing window and turning it into a door. Yeah. So if I have not mentioned that at the beginning, Harriet Bartlett, the project architect at David Chipperfield Architect, is on Zoom. She's available, and you can certainly ask her questions and she can respond. And of course, Harriet, you can always intervene if you have to add something. So
nothing to add, Sebastian.
Okay. Good to hear your voice. Thank you. So that's the proposed front view once more. Viewed as a line drawing, showing the new limestone balustrade, masking the areaway, the limestone bench south of the entry, and the new 5x5 granite paving, extending all the way to the curb. Speaking of the paving material, here's some more detailed information on this. Again, as a reminder, here's what you see currently, the existing concrete sidewalk with bright caulk joints to neighboring concrete sidewalk. The entire area from the curb back into the building vestibule, we propose to refinish with a new silver granite paver, as it's being used in many cultural and also some residential buildings along the museum mile. Here's a plan that shows some of our research where we discovered stone sidewalks and entryways, and we particularly were impressed by the material of the Cooper Hewitts and the Metropolitan Museum, which is a silver gray granite, which is what we propose for our project here as well. The U would be lighter than concrete slabs, than the adjacent concrete slabs, which is a desired effect to mark and support the public nature of the building 1014. Here's another close-up of the Metropolitan Museum entry steps and the proposed matching silver gray granite for our sidewalk. Another material palette summary for the front of the building. We have the limestone matching the building facade for the stair, balustrade, and bench, the granite for the sidewalk, the blackened steel for the gates, and brass and bronze for the door handle and signage. One more time, next to each other, the approved design from last year and the proposed amendment. Also showing the new signage between the two windows, which actually matches the original signage from the building when it was the Goethe Institute. There used to be a bronze plaque. There are still the 4 mechanical fastener holes, which we try to reuse. And
This is the end of the presentation with a photo rendering of the facade once more.
Great. And so commissioners, just to be clear, this, as you've seen, we've presented changes to the base of this building, and there are some amendments that have come to the commission. Much of it is reductions and a new plaque sign, and those are all able to be approved at staff level. So the removal of features that were previously approved can be approved at staff level, in addition to the bronze plaque. So really there are three changes before us today, and that is one, the new egress door with the stone balustrade, which involves relocating the previously approved bench, and then the granite paving at the sidewalk, which is a distinctive sidewalk paving material within otherwise concrete sidewalk. So it's really the stair balustrade combination, the relocation of the bench as a result of it, and the paving at the granite paving at the front. All right. Is there anything you'd like to add at this point?
I don't know if, oh, okay. I just wanted to give, Harriet an opportunity to summarize the changes, unless you think that's not necessary, but it may be helpful just to go through very quickly.
I just summarized them. So, yeah. Okay. I mean, if she wanted to put it into the context of the historic district or make an appropriateness argument, that's fine. We can hear from her, but
sure.
I think we know what the three changes are.
Yeah, I'll keep it very brief. I think Sebastian laid out our plans quite comprehensively. I think, with the amendments to the stairs, we were really inspired by the curved details of the original Beaux-Arts facade. And we wanted to subtly reference these in the proposed intervention. We looked at the kind of curves of the arches, the corbels, and the rustication. And, with the rest, what we're doing in the rest of the house, we've sought to kind of reinterpret existing details where possible. And so that's why we've kind of introduced this kind of subtle curving to the edge of the balustrade wall, the bench details. So it's kind of notably new, yet commensurate with the existing facade. So yeah, we're happy to answer any kind of questions of what was presented today.
Okay. Thank you for that context. Any questions, commissioners? All right, we'll move to public testimony when they have questions after that. So we have one person who signed in. I'm sorry.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Can you hear me? Good afternoon. My name is Nuha Ansari, and I am speaking on behalf of Friends of the Upper East Side Historic Districts. Friends Preservation Committee supports the design refinement at the front of the building, including the egress stair and its limestone balustrade, as well as the new position of the limestone bench to the left of the entrance along the planter bed of the neighboring building. Both elements are elegant and appropriate to its use as a cultural building. We also have no objections to the plaque signage or the proposed granite sidewalk pavers. As far as the entrance gate is concerned, however, we feel, as we did when the application was presented in 2022, that while the approach of treating the entrance as a gate is interesting, the proposed design is not appropriate to the townhouse's style and character. Friends opposes the removal of the detailed historic, albeit not original, ironwork at the door. The proposed gate design is too severe and too emphatic about looking contemporary. We urge the applicants to consider retaining the existing door. Thank you.
All right, is there anyone else in the room who wishes to speak on this item? All right, let's see if we have any remote participants. I'm going to turn it over to Gregory to take us through any members of the public who signed in remotely.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. I am looking through the attendees. And there were no signups in advance either. So I will just note for the record that Manhattan Community Board 8 recommends denial. And I'll bring it back to you, Chair Carroll.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to turn back to you and ask if you'd like to respond to the comments we've heard. I think we've heard a comment about the door, which is not before us today. I don't know if you'd like to speak about the community board process. Rosenthal, I'll just mention a few things and then I'll turn it to Harriet to talk about the door. I mean, technically the door is not before us today. Yeah, okay. So we can move on with that, but we did want to assure you that there's detailing and work and we can talk about that if anyone has questions. But also just about the community board, the community board, like the just as the speaker just before, I'm just reading from their report. They found the proposed refinements at the front elevation and improvement. There's now more sympathy to the existing building. But then again, they were concerned about the door, so they voted to disapprove. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you. Okay, so the denial wasn't necessarily for the proposed amendments, but for the door, which was already approved by the commission. Okay, so I think unless there are any final questions? Yeah.
What was the issue with the canopy? Why you got rid of the canopy and there was a reason for that?
Yeah.
Do you want to answer that, Harriet, or
yeah.
Matt, do you want to respond to that?
I can see it.
Sure. Okay. Or Harriet, why don't you go ahead?
No, you. I don't mind. No, so essentially, the feedback from the last hearing we had in September was that we needed to shorten the canopy width. And once we shortened the canopy width, we felt like it compromised the presence of the canopy. And it really called into question the necessity of it when it was so narrow. And what soon became notice was that, well, the vestibule is essentially a kind of covered external space already. And do we really need the canopy? And I think it just became a lot simpler that we just made it the kind of front entrance door gate and to remove the canopy entirely, because the space behind is a covered external space already.
I might just add that, in the whole, once you sort of alter one bit of the composition, you have to sort of rebalance everything else. And in the act of taking the canopy away and having to bring out the staircase as we wanted to improve the egress, then all of a sudden we had to sort of recut the whole thing. And the motivation, though, was really to try and make the whole proposal just as calm as possible and a very sort of, robust but well-crafted, well-made setting for this building, for the facade of 1014. So yeah, that was the sort of raison d'etre in a way, trying to just make it nice and calm and give it a certain gravitas.
Okay, thank you. And again, the rule doesn't compel the owner to install something. We found it to be appropriate and we've chosen not to do it. And that reduction can be approved at staff level. So let's make a motion to close the hearing and begin our discussion. Commissioner Chu, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Commissioner Goldblum, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the hearing is closed. So again, the components before us today are the egress stair and balustrade in front of it. The design located bench and the granite building within the streetscape. Commissioner Jefferson, would you like to start this one?
This is an extremely tasteful design project, and modifying the doors, I find it fine. I can understand the language difference, but I find it acceptable. Install signage, I think it's tasteful, fine. And in terms of the altering area and replace sidewalk pavement, beautifully done.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chu?
Agreed on all accounts. I think it's very appropriate and elegant.
Commissioner Goldberg?
And another Pritzker landmark project in New York City.
Yeah.
All good.
Great. Commissioner Ginsburg?
Agreed appropriate.
Okay. Commissioner Chen?
Likewise, yeah.
Right. Commissioner Lutfi?
Yes, and the collective, even though step we're not I'm not voting on it. It's all great.
I think it all works together, and I think that the limestone balustrade is a nice way to conceal the new egress stairs that are required, and that the combination of those elements are composed in a way that will help this area relate to the areas within the streetscape. And I think that the concrete, the granite moving is in line with some of the distinctive sidewalks that are found throughout this historic district. All right, so I think we have a consensus. Commissioner Jefferson, would you be able to read the motion?
In the matter of LPC 23 10928, 1014 Fifth Avenue, Metropolitan Museum Historic District. Application to amend work approved under LPC 23-00224 to modify doors, install signage, alter the areaway, and replace sidewalk pavers. I recommend approval finding, oh, do I have to go to? I note that the building scale, material, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historical character of the Metropolitan Museum Historic District. Staff further notes that the public meeting of September 13, 2022, the commission approved a proposal for the installation of a new canopy, woven steel gate, transom grille, limestone bench, and sign kiosk, as well as the rear yard addition. I recommend approval finding that the use of gray granite pavement at the sidewalk and area is in keeping with paving material historically found at some institutional buildings throughout the Metropolitan Museum Historic District. That the new location of the previously approved limestone bench will not obscure any architectural features of the primary facade, that the alteration of the areaway stair will bring them into code compliance, and the work will not remove any significant architectural features, that the material and detail of the reconfigured stairs are in keeping with the historical basement stairs, that the low limestone wall in front of the stairs will relate with the historical masonry facade beyond in terms of material and details, and that the material gate will match the details, the main entrance gate. And that the work will not detract from the architecture of historic character of the building in the Metropolitan Museum Historic District.
There, we need a second.
Sorry, Commissioner Luckman, would you second that motion? All right, Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Commissioner Chen. Aye. Commissioner Chu. Aye. Commissioner Ginsburg.
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum. Aye. Commissioner Jefferson.
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi. With 7 in favor and none opposed, the motion passes.
Right, so that's approved. Thank you. And we'll move to the next and final item.
All right, and that is public hearing item number 5. An application for certificate of appropriateness in the borough of Manhattan, block 1523, lot 72, 1209 Park Avenue in the expanded Carnegie Hill Historic District. This is a converted 19th century row house with a modern style facade designed by Lucian David and altered in 1960. The application is to reclad the front facade, replace the rear facade, and construct rooftop and rear yard additions.
Hello, commissioners and member staff. It's so nice to see all of you in person again. My name is Jackie Kudival. I'm a preservation consultant on this project. I'm here today with Jose Ramirez. Oh, wait, hold on. I better do this, right? Just when I got used to Zoom. Okay. I'm here today with Jose Ramirez of JL Ramirez Architect and the building owner, David Gold. This project is 1209 Park Avenue, a modern style row house originally built in 1889 and altered to its present modern design in 1960, when the house was converted into a school building. The proposal you're seeing today is for the redesign of the front facade and for the installation of a rooftop addition and rear addition. And I'd like to introduce David Gold to make just a few brief statements to you before I make the presentation. Thank you.
Hi, I'm David Gold. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Chair Carroll and Commissioners. Just a couple of little things that I just wanted to put out there before Jackie jumps into this. First, my family appreciates both the time of the commission and the work of the staff on this. The home is for me personally and my family, and it's been a long road to get here. So we really appreciate the time and the focus and seeing everyone in person. I grew up on Staten Island and in Brooklyn. But I've lived on the Upper East Side for the last 20 years. I love the neighborhood. I'm blessed with a young, growing family that I want to be able to raise there, and I have a number of children. My young wife is with them right now. She's a little under the weather as well, but she is on. Otherwise, she would be right here next to me, as this is pretty important to us. And we'd also like the ability for my 85-year-old mom to be able to stay with us. So just quickly, as I said, I just wanted to say I appreciate your time today and the important work of the commission. I have tremendous respect for you all for the work, and particularly for that of the staff. They really are first rate. We would very much appreciate your support on our home, which Jackie will now tell you about. Thanks.
Okay, Jackie Prudivan again for the record. Okay, so here's the house's location on the east side of Park Avenue, mid-block between 94th and 95th Streets. It's in the expanded Carnegie Hill Historic District. And as you can see on the map on the right, it's actually on the edge of the district, and that the neighboring apartment building is outside the district. The area shaded in red indicates a portion of the historic district. Here's the building in context, looking at the east side of Park Avenue between 94th and 95th Streets. To the left are the houses that are part of 1209's original row. And to the right is that large apartment building that's outside the district. This house was originally part of a row of 7 houses that included 1209 to 1217 Park Avenue, and around the corner, 112 and 114 East 95th Street. Here's the view across the street, across Park Avenue, looking at the west side of Park on this block. This is the Hunter College Campus Schools building, which is not in the district. Here's what the house looked like in its original 19th century facade in the 1940s. You'll note that by the early 20th century, its neighbor on the left, which you see in the 1940s tax photo, 1211 Park Avenue, had already received a neo-Georgian style facade update, which was one of the classically inspired architectural styles popular in that era. By the 1980s, in the center photo, you have the buff brick stark facade that it has today. And on the right is the 1991 designation photo. And here are some close-up photos to show you in better detail what the existing facade looks like, the basement level window, the below-grade entrance, the view looking at it from the north and south on the sidewalk. And here again, in the sort of center photo, is its neighbor at 1211 Park, which was altered in 1922. Like 1112 Park, there are many other examples of classically inspired facade redesigns in the Carnegie Hill Historic District, as was a fashionable thing to do to one's house on the Upper East Side in the early 20th century. Here are some examples of these types of significant later alterations. These are neo-Georgian and neoclassical style facades, which also received basement level entrances and were installed in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s on East 92nd, 93rd, and 94th Streets. Here are additional examples of historic facade alterations from the early 20th century in the district. These are along 92nd and 93rd Streets, and again, 1211 Park here on the right. Oh, wait, I should have given you the styles of their houses, but I'm too afraid to try to go back in the presentation, so I'm not touching it. But those other styles were Renaissance Revival, Neoclassical, Neo-Federal, and Neo-Georgian. What you're seeing here is one example within this particular district of an LPC approved alteration to a modern style building's facade. This is 10 East 87th Street, a house co-designed by Felix Augenfeld and former LPC Commissioner Jan Herd Pokorny.
It was built in 1955 with a facade of buff brick with travertine sheathed base. LPC approved the installation of metal cladding at the upper floors, stucco at the base, and replacement windows. Alma? Okay. Okay. In nearby historic districts, there are many examples of houses whose facades have been redesigned with LPC approval. And in the classical language, similar to the facade redesign of the facade redesigns of the early 20th century in Carnegie Hill, and similar to what we're going to be showing you today. On this sheet are 3 houses in the Upper East Side Historic District, which were altered with LPC approval, and which incidentally also replaced facades that had a style designation and which have basement level entrances. These are at the top left, 127 East 71st Street, which had a modern style designation. On the top right, 33 East 63rd Street, which had a neo-Greek style designation. And on the bottom is 7 East 63rd, which, although it had a no style designation, its former facade reminds me a lot of the subject building, 1209 Park Avenue. Okay. Here are additional examples of LPC-approved facade alterations in the Upper East Side Historic District. Again, classically inspired designs with basement-level entrances. On the bottom left corner is the most recent of such approvals, 38 East 75th Street, which received approval last year for the installation of new facades at front and rear and for an additional floor. Am I doing wrong? Okay. Lastly, here are examples of houses that had no style designations in the Upper East Side and Metropolitan Museum of Art historic districts, which received LPC approval for new facades. I find the one on the right interesting and relevant to what we're doing here, 10 East 78th Street, because its facade had detailed brickwork, which I think it gave it a lot more architectural interest than 1209 Park's stark facade, which was given a style designation. Now, turning our attention back to 1209 Park, here are historic maps that explain the block's development. In 1892, the map in the top left corner shows a pretty homogeneous block of masonry row houses and some wood stables. Interestingly, it shows 1209 Park Avenue as already having a full height rear L, rear addition, when the other houses in its row to the north did not. The map on the bottom from 1930, the maps on the bottom from 1930 and 1955 show that by the early 20th century, the homogeneity of the block was interrupted by the construction of large apartment buildings on Lexington Avenue, and that a one-story garage structure was built at the rear of 1217 Park Avenue. I'm so afraid to touch anything up here. Okay, I'm just going to depend on you guys to, okay, it's sort of right where my cursor is. Okay, so the one-story garage structure that was built at the rear of 1217 Park facing 95th Street. 1217 Park is, again, one of the houses in the same row as the subject building. And forward. Here's the proposed block plan. The arrow is pointing to 1209 Park. You'll note the large apartment building adjacent to 1209 Park, which was built in 1961, is outlined in red because it's not in the district. So in its own unique way, 1209 Park is on the edge of this district. The color coding here shows the proposed 5-story addition at the rear of 1209 Park, which would square off the existing L, plus add a floor to the existing rear addition and a connecting 1-story rooftop addition. So the overall effect would be adding a partial floor to the rear of 1209's roof. You can also see on this map the existing 1-story addition that was approved on top of 1211 Park Avenue, which is not set back from the rear facade, and the 3-story addition that was approved by LPC in 2010 on top of the garage structure at the rear of 1217 Park Avenue. You can also see the locations of a few other 1-story rooftop additions in the block, as well as the locations of 11 other full-width rear additions. Most of these full width additions are 2 stories, one is 3 stories, and the one at 1217 Park rises to the full height of the rear of the building, creating a full height rear addition, which we'll show you later in this presentation. This is just an aerial view of the block. You can see a few of the existing rear additions and the rooftop addition at the neighboring house at 1211 Park, and the 3-story addition on top of the original garage structure at 1217 Park, which is, okay, I can't control this at all. Over here, sort of. Okay. And here are additional photos of existing conditions within the block. On the left, you're looking east from the roof of 1209 Park, and you can see some of the existing rear additions on houses facing 94th and 95th Streets. The top middle photo shows the rear of 1209 Park Avenue with the mock-up constructed on top of it. You'll note there is an almost 12-foot gap between the side of 1209's existing addition and the projecting portion of the facade of the neighboring apartment building. And I'm talking about this gap here. That's about 12 feet between the rear L of 1209 and where the facade jogs out at the neighboring apartment building. The bottom center photo shows the rooftop addition at the neighboring house, which sits in the same plane as the rear facade. And in the photo on the right, you can see the 3-story full height addition that was constructed at the rear of 1217 Park. So I'm talking about this addition here. Okay. There are some visible rooftop additions within the district. The top photos here show the houses at 1141 to 1149 Park Avenue. The middle photo shows the actual view from the west on East 91st Street, and on the right is that zoomed in view. The addition at 1141 predates designation, and the addition at 1145 was approved by LPC. On the bottom are photos of 48 East 92nd Street. Its rooftop addition likely predates designation. And on top of this page, you're looking at 63 and 65 East 92nd Street. The addition at 63 did receive LPC approval, but it was not supposed to be visible. And the addition at 65 may predate designation. On the bottom are photos of 60 East 93rd Street, which also has a visible rooftop addition that may predate designation. 38 East 75th Street, the approval, one of the approvals I noted earlier for new facades on a building in the Upper East Side Historic District. This also provides an example of an LPC approved rear alteration similar to what's being proposed at 1209 Park Avenue today. These are the drawings that were shown at hearing last year. The work approved includes constructing a full height rear addition that connected to a new full floor. In this case, the commission found, and I'm paraphrasing, although it's somewhat quoted in that box, that the existing rear facade had been modified over time, that the new addition would not project further into the rear yard than the existing rear addition, that the work would not disrupt a fully intact rear facade, and that the design and materiality of the rear addition would be in keeping with the character of rear facades within the block. It's our contention that what we're going to show you for 1209 meets the same criteria. As discussed earlier, here are images of 1217 Park Avenue, which again is part of the same row as 1209, and which LPC approved a 3-story addition on top of a 1-story garage. On the left and in the middle are the designation photos where you can see the garage, and on the right is the current condition showing the addition that was approved in 2010. In this case, the commission found, and again I'm paraphrasing, that the addition is well scaled to the building, that the addition on a corner row house will have no effect on the large central green space of the block. I ask you to keep this in mind as you review the proposal for 1209 Park, because it's our contention that the large apartment building next to and outside the district creates a situation that is equivalent to a corner condition for this building. Also, as discussed earlier, here are images of 1211 Park Avenue, the adjacent house to the north, which again is part of the same row and at which LPC approved a one-story rooftop addition. This addition is visible from the street. As you'll see in pages to follow, this addition was also built in the same plane as its rear facade, which interrupts the relationship of 1209 Park Avenue to the other houses in its row. Here on the left is 1211 Park Avenue as viewed from the sidewalk. In the middle is a photo showing its LPC approved rooftop addition. And on the left is a photo showing the rear of the rooftop addition in the same plane as its rear facade. In the findings for this approval, the commission wrote that, again, paraphrasing, that the proposed addition will be only minimally visible from East 95th Street, that the simple massing will not overwhelm the streetscape, and that the dark metal roof will blend in with the backdrop of the taller brick apartment building behind it. This last finding is particularly significant for our proposal, as we intend to make the materiality of the proposed rooftop addition blend with the red brick of the apartment building. Okay. Here are elevation and plan drawings showing the proposed front facade redesign for 1209 Park. Like the houses in Carnegie Hill that got early 20th century facade updates, the proposal here is to install a limestone clad facade using classically inspired details. The below grade entrance would be maintained, highlighted by an entablature supported by pilasters. There would be a rusticated limestone base with modest profiled cornice separating the basement level from the upper floors, and granite water table. The upper floors would be clad in limestone panels in a running bond pattern. There would be profiled limestone moldings surrounding the windows with projecting sills supported by brackets. The windows would be white painted wood casement windows with black painted ironwork in front of them, which would repeat in the design of the window grille at the basement level and at the fence and gate at the entrance stair. Here are some detail drawings for the front facade. And here's the proposed front facade in context with its neighbors in elevation. And here's a rendering of the front facade in context with its neighbors as viewed from across Park Avenue. Here are additional rendered views looking north and south from the corners across Park Avenue. And now turning to the proposed rooftop addition or partial fifth floor, here are the roof plans. On top is the existing roof plan, in which you can see the existing full height L addition, which is approximately 8 feet wide and 11 foot, 10 feet deep. And you can also see the exterior stair that is adjacent to the L. In the middle is the proposed roof plan, showing the proposed rooftop addition set back and integrated into the proposed full height rear addition. And on bottom is the proposed roof plan of the addition. Here are photos of the existing conditions of the roof. You'll note there's an existing stair bulkhead, which is to be kept, and the lot line windows of the adjacent apartment building. As you'll see on the pages to follow, a conscious decision was made to place the rooftop addition back so that these lot line windows would not be blocked. So again, these lot line windows that you see in these photos on the bottom will not be touched or affected by this work. Okay. Here are sections through the existing and proposed roof showing that those lot line windows will not be touched again, and showing that the proposed addition, which would be clad in red brick, would be about 12 foot 4 inches tall, including its parapets. Here are photos taken from the roof showing the volume and placement of the addition. Here are photos taken from the sidewalk in front of the building showing that the addition will not be visible from directly in front of the building. And here are photos taken from across, oops, hold on. Okay, and here are photos taken from across Park Avenue, including the south end of the mall at 94th Street, showing that the mock-up will not be visible from the avenue. Now, where the addition does become visible from is when walking west on East 95th Street, which incidentally is outside the district. The middle photos show the real view, and to the right is the zoomed in version of those views. I ask commissioners to imagine this volume clad in red brick, like the neighboring apartment building, in which case the addition would blend in with the masonry behind it, and therefore not be obtrusive or call undue attention to itself. And here are additional photos showing how the addition becomes visible when walking west on East 95th Street. Okay. Here's just the existing building section and the proposed building section where you can see the rear addition and the existing outline of the building outlined in the red dots. Here again is a photo of the existing rear facade where you can see the full height L that is currently there. The exterior stair that was installed because this had served as a school previously. And again, you can see that gap that exists between the existing L and the this bay that jogs out from the back of the modern apartment building next to it. Oh, you can also note here again this rear facade, how this rear facade at the neighboring building has been continued up by the construction of that rooftop addition. And here are the existing and proposed rear elevations. Again, the rear addition would just be clad in red brick with running bond, jack arches at the windows, white painted casement windows, and a balcony at this first floor. And this is not a double height glazed opening. This is an actual separation of 2 floors by a spandrel. Here's the existing rear facade in context, the proposed rear facade in context, and some photos of the existing conditions of the rear yard, which again, this previously served as a playground. And just to show you the changes at the rear and also in plan for the rear. So we'd be going from almost 8 feet wide rear addition to full width. So that's approximately 20 feet wide. And they'd be introducing new paving and planting bed to the rear of the rear yard. And that's it. That's our proposal. We welcome any questions or comments. And again, the architect, Jose Ramirez, is here to answer your questions as well.
Okay, thank you very much, commissioners. Do we have any questions? All right, I don't think we have any questions at this time, so let's move to public testimony. We have 2 people in the room who have signed in today, and we'll start with Nuha Ansari.
Hello, Commissioners. This is Nuha Ansari speaking on behalf of Friends of the Upper East Side Historic Districts. Friends Preservation Committee does not object to the proposal to reclad the non-original modern facade at this roadhouse with limestone panels, and we find the details of the masonry surrounds at the windows and door are refined and unobtrusive. Our Preservation Committee is concerned, however, that the proposed rear yard and rooftop additions are too bulky, and the resulting massing of the building would change the existing balance and interplay of the rear yards within the donut. Although many of these houses have been altered to a greater or lesser degree over the decades, none to the north or the east along 95th Street have been subject to such bulky additions and still retain a sense of the historic fabric and parapet lines of the original row houses. Even the full width rooftop addition at the neighboring house to the north is not as tall as the proposed addition here and reveals the cornice of the original row house. The proposed alterations here, if allowed, would obscure any sense of the original structure and would negatively impact the sense of light and space created by the leafy rear yards within the block. We urge the applicants to consider amending their proposal so that it is more in keeping with the scale and historic character of the neighboring houses. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Lucy Lemaine.
Hi, Commissioners. My name is Lucy Levine. I'm speaking on behalf of the Historic Districts Council. We believe that the front facade is in need of significant refinement of its architectural proportions, hierarchy, and detailing, and we encourage the applicant to work with LPC staff to refine the facade's vocabulary. The rear facade needs more work. The proportions of the masonry openings to the solid wall are inappropriate, and the configuration of the muntins on the glazing system lacks consistency. We encourage the applicant to work with LPC to create larger masonry openings on the upper floors that also vary in height based on the internal hierarchy of the project. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, and that is everybody who's in the room presently. So with no one else here, I will turn to Gregory and we'll allow our members of the public to testify remotely at this time.
Okay, thank you, Chair Carroll. If you are testifying via Zoom and you are in the meeting now, please raise your hand so I could call on you. And first up, we'll be hearing from Ella Bath. So Ella Bath, I am promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hello, I believe I'm unmuted now. Yes, can we start the clock?
Yes,
Thank you. My name is Ella Bath. I live at 1199 Park Avenue. Thank you for hearing my opposition to the proposed expansion at 1209 Park Avenue. And here's why I'm opposed. I moved to Carnegie Hill because it is an historic district. The proposed expansion at 1209 Park will block enough view and light from my home for me to be talking about it here. Worse, my neighbors on the A and B lines of our co-op will have key windows blocked, partially at least. Air and light will suffer, and they will now face a brick wall. Of far-reaching concern, the proposed height and rear expansion of 1209 is precedent-setting. It is appreciably taller than the ensemble of important historic homes that are next to it, all the way down the block on Park Avenue between 94th and 95th Street. In both height and rear extension, the expansion negatively impacts our neighbors who live in the extraordinary Goat Hill brownstones on 95th Street between Park and Lexington, which not incidentally includes the landmark plaqued Al Hirschfeld House. The proposed 1209 expansion would intrude on one of the prized donuts of New York City. Let me repeat that. The proposed 1209 expansion would intrude on one of the prized donuts of New York City. I regret that this proposed expansion adversely affects the integrity of what makes Carnegie Hill, Carnegie Hill. I hope that you will oppose the expansion of 1209 Park Avenue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next up, we'll be hearing from Kate Manning. So Kate Manning, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record.
I am Kate Manning. Are you hearing me? Are you hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you so much, commissioners, for your care and attention to preserving the character of historic districts, and particularly our historic district. I've lived in a townhouse at 114 East 95th Street in Carnegie Hill for 30 years. And our rear yard directly faces the rear of 1209 Park. While we applaud the restoration of this old building, which needs it, I'm speaking in strong opposition to their expansion, both in the rear and on the roof. First, because if approved, this plan would set a terrible precedent for the houses on Park, which could add even more rooftop additions, and it will cause my neighbors at 1199 Park to face a brick wall. In the rear, it's also a very bad precedent, which if approved will allow further erosion of the green space. And in the so-called donut hole, which is a historic detail The original architects designed these houses with adequate indoor and outdoor space, which has been harmoniously shared. Our yards at 114 and 112 are already half the size you can see on your plot map of the other rear yards in this house, in this district. And some years ago, our neighbor at 160 pushed out a large extension and added a rooftop, and the rear extension added a 5-foot wall to the side of our yard, which further darkens our space. The 1209 rear yard extension would loom over and darken our yard even more. Our neighbors on Park were not privy to learning about this proposal until quite late. I've spoken to them in recent days, and they are very dismayed to hear that a 5-story wall will face their outdoor balcony in the rear. Other neighbors in our block association are also very concerned about precedent. All the townhouses are vulnerable to such extensions into the donut and to rooftop additions, which will create large mass and more height in a district which is traditionally of low roofs and green space in the back. The photos in the presentation show that clearly, that looming rear yard extension and the rooftop addition, which we can see from our rear yards, will be unprecedented. So little by little, this green space is being filled in. It creates bad feeling between neighbors. And we respectfully ask the commission to reject 1209's proposal and perhaps consider stronger regulations for historic rear yard in the future to prevent erosion of this precious detail from the past, which is really enjoyed not just by the people lucky enough to have access to these spaces, but also those in the surrounding apartments. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope to see this proposal defeated. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much for your testimony. And next, we will be hearing from Ann Dean. So Ann Dean, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. So if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you will have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Takes a second to get through this. Hi, my name is Ann Dean. I'm a resident of 1199. I have lived in Carnegie Hill since 1987. And I am presenting to say how vehemently opposed I am for this proposal. I do not mind, and I think it'll be a great addition for the lime rock facade to be changed in the front. But the rear and upper portions of the proposal not only affect us environmentally in terms of losing air and light. There are also 3 very mature trees that abut the rear of 1209 that could be severely damaged. As a result of these trees, a number of us don't have to use air conditioning a lot of the days when other people do because we get the shade. They also form a carbon footprint. They also help deflate our carbon footprint, and that's something I know the city is very concerned about. The current L, in terms of precedent, the general practice I understand of your commission is to restrict expansions, especially in what are called L and U extensions. 169 East 95th Street was granted a rooftop extension, but their L was restricted by 50%. The same principle is applied to 121 and 123 East 94th Streets, and we question why these principles can't be applied here. Not following your precedent would be, again, would be incredibly unprecedented and would increase the volume. And one of the things I thought I've been hearing this afternoon is that you want to create, you want to make sure that the ratio between volume and space is appropriate and elegant, and this is not. In addition, from an economic standpoint, I know no one really wants to talk about it, but I'm a real estate broker with Compass, and I can guarantee you that the surrounding buildings will lose 10 to 25% of their value if this very large rear extension and very high roof extension is permitted. I hope that the commission hears us and agrees in part and asks that this proposal go back to the drawing board, and that these that the proposal they're very good. They're very good. But that they go back and come back with something that would be more appropriate to the historic district and the donut of 95th Street. Thank you very much for listening. I have to commend you all, commissioners, on your civility. I wish that there were more of that in city government. And,
Thank you.
But thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your testimony. And next up, we'll be hearing from John Silverstein. So John Silverstein, I am promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you will have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Silverstein. I'm in 1199 Park, also overlooking the roof of 1209 Park. I want to make this quick because most of my points are similar to those that have been made already. Page 14 of the LPC presentation, I think, shows the 1209 is the only house in what's been called the donut, with an L-shaped extension that rises without a setback to the full height of the building's roof. And the proposed plan includes more than doubling the width of the L, as well as adding some 12 to 15 feet on top of the L as widened. As a result, the proposed changes are out of scale to everything in the donut, and they'll adversely affect the light and air in and around the donut. The proposed redevelopment is inconsistent with changes that have previously been permitted in the donut. For example, 1209 would be significantly taller than the addition on 1211 Park. The proposed changes, as previously been mentioned, would set a dangerous precedent for what would be permitted in the donut and elsewhere. While feet and inches may not seem significant on drawings or a piece of paper, they matter tremendously to neighbors who would be adversely affected. I would suggest that the commission, particularly in light of the 39-2 vote against the proposed plans by Community Board 8, ask the owner to revise the plans to take account of the community's reaction, consistent with the neighborhood and more in line with the neighbor at 1211 Park, which I think would save adverse reaction to the community. Thank you very much to the commission for all your time and effort. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And next up, we will be hearing from Carolyn Erisman. So Carolyn Erisman, I am promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you will have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Caroline Erisman. I live at 1199 Park Avenue, directly adjacent to 1209 Park. I oppose the expansion of 1209 Park Avenue, and I cede my 2 minutes to Lo Vandervalk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your testimony. We do have Lo Vandervalk on our list, so we'll be hearing from Lo Vandervalk right now from Carnegie Hill Neighbors. I'm promoting you to panelist right now. Hello, Lo Vandervalk. Yes, so he just accepted. Okay, so Lo Vandervalk, if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, my name is Lo Vandervalk, speaking on behalf of Carnegie Hill Neighbors. We would like the commission to consider in its deliberation an alternative. We do I want to set out our position. In short, it is to eliminate the fifth floor rear extension and pull back and largely match the rooftop addition of its neighbor at 1211. To be clear, we do favor the following rear additions aspects: the widening of the first four floors, we agree with, to the full width of the building. And we would approve the full depth extension for the first floor, but we would like floors 2, 3, and 4 to be half extensions because it will lessen the blocking of light and air to the immediate row house neighbors. But in considering an alternative, we are concerned, of course, with the height of the windows. Carnegie CHN has had discussions with the owners of 1209 and apartment 6AB of 1199 Park. The owners of 6AB are willing to allow boarding up of half of the third window from Park to make this happen. Note, in most photos, 95th Street, from 95th Street, the three windows facing the north at this level are all visible. The drawings are not very clear, but they do indicate for the top of the stairs, the current roof floor to ceiling height of 7 feet 8 inches. Roof thickness, we would, for this exercise, just assume is 0. But the distance from the top of that stairs to the midsection of the window is about 30 inches. Combined the stair landing, this gives us 10 feet 2 inches. This will allow a roof thickness of 1 foot 6 inches and the net floor ceiling height of 8 foot 8 inches. This is comparable within 1 or 2 inches of the cited example of 38 East 75th Street, where their final floor is about 8 feet 9 inches. This would solve two of the main problems. The top floor rear expansion would be left open, as currently the case, and benefiting the surrounding neighbors with light and air. And visibility.
I'm terribly sorry. Lord Vanderbilt, if you could please summarize your testimony. Your 3 minutes are up.
Yes, thank you for that. The visibility from the public way would be sharply cut back, especially if the masonry parapets are replaced with dark metal railings. Thank you so much. And we hope this alternative can be considered, or aspects of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And next up, we will be hearing from Jeremy Woodoff from the Victorian Society of New York. So Jeremy Woodoff, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you will have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Jeremy Woodoff speaking for the Victorian Society, New York. This proposal suffers by comparison with the many Beaux-Arts and neoclassical style houses shown by the applicant, including both those dating to the early 20th century and those resulting from redesigns recently approved by the Commission. Part of the problem is that this house retains its original asymmetric form with a recessed entrance bay on the right. While typical for the original style of the house, an asymmetric full-height recess isn't typical for the proposed style. Also problematic is that the entrance is so far below sidewalk level. It reads as a secondary basement entrance in the new design, even more so than in the existing facade, because the more elaborate entrance surround proposed is only about half above grade. We suggest a few possible ways to address these problems. One is to restore the stoop. There is one remaining stoop on this block, and a stoop could work with the interior layout of this single-family house. An alternate approach would add more elaborate detailing on either the former parlor floor or the top floor, or both. On the parlor floor, this elaboration occurs at either the single window where the original door was, or at the paired window, or both. At the top floor, all the windows are differentiated from those on the lower floors, emphasizing the top of the building. These features can be seen on many of the neighborhood houses pictured. In any event, we do not find the proposal as presented to be appropriate and recommend against approval. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I am looking through the attendees list now, and I do not see any further hands raised. If you would like to speak, please raise your hands. Okay, I see no further hands raised, so I will just note for the record that we received a letter from Councilmember Keith Powers recommending approval. Manhattan Community Board 8 recommends denial. And we also received 7 additional letters from individuals recommending denial. And I'll bring it back to you, Chair Carol.
Thank you very much, Gregory. All right, I'd like to turn back to the applicants and ask if you'd like to respond to the comments.
Thank you, commissioners. Excuse me, and thank you everyone who offered testimony. We, of course, we always working in New York City, you can make all your neighbors happy at once, but that's seldom the case when anyone is proposing an addition or some type of work on their home. I would say first that, firstly, I'm sure I don't have to remind commissioners that your purview is not light and air issues. This commission cannot regulate private views. What you can regulate is whether or not something is appropriate. And you have to do that by looking at your own precedent of approvals. What I did by showing you in the presentation, some examples of where I think findings for other additions within this block and for a house in a neighboring historic district were relevant to this situation. This is a house where its situation is very different in that it's, as I said, it's on the edge of the district in a way, because it's next to a building that's outside of its district, a building which incidentally will not have any windows blocked by the construction, by this proposed construction. It would change private views from certain people living within the block, that's true, but it wouldn't actually touch any windows belonging to anyone else. But in terms of the bulk itself, I think each building has to be looked at individually with its own set of circumstances. In this case, you have a building where, am I allowed to advance or go back to? Okay, great. If we can go backwards, I'm going the wrong way.
Yeah, I think that you moved the opposite era.
I got this. Okay, so I'll just show you this elevation drawing. You have a building that already has lost its relationship to the other houses in its row. Whereby, for one thing, the neighboring addition on the neighbor's house has created a continuous facade where it's interrupted its original cornice line. You have this 4-story L that was built at some point. You have an exterior stair, metal stair, which currently extends past the footprint of the existing addition. You have window openings that were already altered on each floor from the basement to the top, including most significantly for this commission, this Chicago window that was installed at the top floor. So you have a situation where not only do you have a building that's not architecturally distinguished at the front facade, but I'd argue that it's not architecturally distinguished at the rear either. Coupling that with the fact that it's next to a building that's outside the district with a much larger volume than this small house. I think that in this case, it's appropriate to not only square off the rear addition, but to let that addition be to the full height of the building and to add on the partial floor at the top. And again, that partial floor is not going to be touching anyone's lot line windows. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to add. Someone mentioned the idea of adding the stoop back onto the front of the house. It is a nice idea, but in reality, it would take 1 or 2 years of working with DOT to possibly make that happen. And the owner of this building has already been through a 2-year process, just trying to get the purchase of this building through and, put together a nice home for his growing children that he'd like to be able to move in before they're old enough to move out. Let me see if I want to add anything else. there was also comments about the carbon footprint of implications for this work. I just want to point out that there currently are no plantings in the back of this lot. It was a playground. You can see here, any trees are outside of this lot, and the work will actually add in planting beds that will return some greenery to this lot. And I'd like to introduce the architect, Jose Ramirez, who would like to make some comments.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Jose Ramirez, architect, and Joe Ramirez, architect. Just wanted to respond to some of the comments from the people who spoke through Zoom. The rear void, the rear part of the building is already in L, as you saw in the presentation, and we think that it's appropriate because it's not extending beyond the existing rear. Right now, there's an existing large steel staircase that projects beyond. How do I do this back? I need to go back. Let's see, 42. And there's a perfect example right there. You could see there's a large steel staircase that actually is currently in that void. So the comments were made regarding taking away green space. We feel that apply because we're actually just filling in straight line extension of that rear and eliminating that large hideous staircase that exists now and just filling it in with a beautiful brick facade, brick rear to the building with some nice windows and some nice details. And as we said, the front facade has a rusticated limestone base, the classical entry and tablature, and cornice that we also think is appropriate.
Okay, thank you. All right, Commissioners, do we have any final questions? All right, not seeing any questions, we'll make a motion to close the hearing. Commissioner Colburn, would you make a motion to close the hearing? And Commissioner Chu, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the hearing is closed and we'll begin our discussion now. And we do have the front of the building and the back of the building before us. So you may want to organize your comments in that way and speak to the front and to the back. The front facade what's being proposed is a recladding with some ornament that the applicants have presented. Would be inspired by some of the classically inspired renovations of facades from the early 20th century and then other commission approved facades. And so we can have a discussion about that. The window openings, I think, are not changing, just the facade cladding and the details. And then at the rear facade, we have a proposal that there's an existing full height rear L. Proposal is to make that a full width rear yard addition at the same depth. It won't project deeper than the existing L. And then finally, there's a rooftop addition which sits on the rear addition, so that it will increase the height of that rear addition by a floor. So I would say, considerations about road and construction and those kinds of things. We do know that the scale, must you know what historic fabric is there, how altered is it, what's being removed, does the proposal the scale and character of the house and this particular district and particularly the commission has approved larger additions because of their adjacencies to larger buildings. And the fact that many houses at the ends of blocks have been historically increased in size. So this is also set at the end of the block. And so, as I said, it doesn't go deeper than the existing addition. So I think the question isn't so much about the impact on green space, which is another factor that we consider, but really the scale of the additions together and how they relate to how they relate to the extent to which they're being added and the adjacent buildings within the district. So we'll begin our discussion. Commissioner Ginsburg, would you like to start this one?
Thank you. This is a bit of the hard road because in general it's probably appropriate. I'm wondering why this may cause problems. Other issues, if the top floor of the addition could be set back a bit from the floors below, so the building wasn't quite so monolithic. But I realize in doing that, you're shrinking that penthouse and you don't want to push it forward because then it would be visible across the street. So I'll be curious what the other commissioners say, but that seems to me my concern is it makes this facade fairly massive.
Thank you very much. Okay, Commissioner Goldblum.
Okay, I have no such qualms. For better or for worse. I think on the rear, I don't see a significant difference, in my opinion, between what we saw this morning on 7th Avenue and this, which is that the intent, not only do I look at a row, which doesn't exist here in any meaningful way, and continuity from an aesthetic perspective, but the retention of a sense of volume of the original building. In this case, that volume is unmodified at the back, with the exception of that steel stair. So I would ask for the applicant to do what we often ask applicants to do, which is take the top floor addition and set it back 3 feet from the existing facade, and leave the full width addition infill to retain the expression of the building on its top current floor with the L. In terms of the front.
So just to clarify,
sure.
So a full height, full width addition would be okay if the rooftop addition is set back from it.
No.
So
a full width addition would be okay on floors basement 1 and 2. On floor 3, which used to be the top floor of the building, it's just the L, such that we can always read what used to be the top volume, what used to be the volume of the building, the historic volume of the building. And then on floor 4, push back 3 feet. The front facade is really interesting to me because I know the work of this architect, and this architect knows the rules. This architect knows how to do classical architecture, and this is a bad mashup where you open the molding book, threw some around the windows, took out the hatch for limestone and said goodnight. It's not right. And the problem with the presentation was it was full of reasons why it's okay to do a limestone facade on a modern building, but it didn't really look at what those architects did. I wouldn't be surprised if some of those buildings were designed by doesn't show the level of care and craft and attention to detail and understanding of the classical vocabulary in its many forms that those other buildings aspired to. If you're going to do a historic building, you have to play by those rules. And that goes for the cornice, it goes for the proportions of the windows, it goes for the way you resolve the A-B nature of that facade, which has been done in neoclassical, Georgian, etc. buildings. It's just not done this way. I mean, the sills are weird, the cornices end in an odd way. It's just heavy-handed. I'm sure there's a story behind it, but it's really not our problem. And I personally would feel that the facade needs a lot of work.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chu?
Okay, let's talk about massing first. I think that the rear facade, my feeling is it's too massive because I don't see any reflection of the historic mass anymore. And that's because it was infilled on one portion, half, and then there was another floor added on top. I could accept a full floor addition that infilled from the existing L up to the existing height, but I feel that the top addition is too much. In addition to that, I do think the facade needs to be studied. I think Commissioner Goldblum talked well about the front facade. I think the rear is also has a lot more challenges. If you look at the existing facades with your proposal in it, you just look to the right and look at the houses and even the proportion of the windows that are in the existing building itself. There's a certain proportion of scale of verticality to width that tells me in a sense that that was a house, a townhouse, and not an apartment building, which is to the left. I feel that this elevation starts to drift away from the character of the townhouse structure. And I'm not going to say the way it should be done, but I do think that this whole elevation needs to be looked at and maybe just look at it in a way that's a little bit more sympathetic to the townhouses that are adjacent.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Jefferson.
I completely concur with the two commissioners ahead of me.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Lefty.
Yeah, you saved me a lot of. So I concur with both of you on the front. It's almost kind of a shame, like to do all this redesign, but not do it as well as you can. And we are so amenable on the Upper East Side to this, and on the rear, I completely agree with Commissioner Chu in terms of the setback and also in terms of the proportions. It doesn't, there's not even,
yeah. Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chen.
Obviously, the commissioner has spoken and they all have merit, and I will not confuse the applicant even further. So I think every study is warranted. Sure.
Yes, Commissioner Genovich.
Because I think Commissioner Goldman's comments in the front facade are very germane, and I agree with them.
Great, thank you. So we're not going to take an action today. I think that the commission has given you some good direction on how to approach the site, both refining the design of the front facade, really looking at those classically inspired facades and understanding the vocabulary and how it might apply here. And then also looking at reducing the rear addition and refining that design and in terms of its proportions as well. So we'll take no action and we'll see you back as soon as you're ready. And that concludes our day today. Thank you all for your time and work.